Yeah, and right now we'll get right into it with our first session, which is a keynote session. And the keynote is by Ayla Haddo-Flood. And just to share a bit more on her abstract, she says that whichever way you look at it, Africa has had a raw deal. The efforts of community-based projects such as OpenStreetMap and Wikimedia that are concentrated on activating Africa's spaces and knowledges face more challenges than most regions. At times, it seems like there are insurmountable odds stacked against them, especially when it comes to access, control, representation, and participation. In this talk, she will use the Wikipedia work as an example of where they currently stand, hoping that together as aligned communities, we can leap over these challenges whilst taking the opportunity to do it on our own terms. So I'll welcome Ayla, and then we'll go ahead to play her pre-recording for this session.
The invisible visible. You keep I'm so very honored to be invited to give the keynote speech at the 2021 State of the Map virtual conference. I wasn't expecting to open it though, and I am really glad that I pre-recorded this keynote speech, because the last time I gave a speech of this magnitude, my whole body was shaking so much you could hear the earthquake of nerves distorting my voice. Unfortunately, if you track it down on YouTube, you still can. So it gives me great pleasure to be before you now, digitally, virtually. As we will discuss, that is in itself a big deal. I am in awe of your work. You make the invisible visible. You keep all information current and help those who are the most vulnerable and easiest to overlook, the poorest, the most remote, the least accessible, to be seen, accessed, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing this, but literally put on the map. There is a lot of crossover with my world, the Wikiverse, and yours. I count several of you among my friends. We have already walked a long road together, and I know that many of us work together towards the same goals. Many of you shift your hats between the Wikimedia and the OpenStreetMap community seamlessly, and between Creative Commons and your day jobs. We share the same passions, the same ethos. We share, we collaborate, share resources, ideas, solutions, and build on each other's successes and wins. And that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about here, our shared goals, the challenges we face together, and the solutions we come up with. The reason why is that it matters. Whichever hat we wear, we will always be building this extraordinary visual and narrative map of Africa together in its most varied and beautiful forms. So who am I? Well, I'm Ayla Haddo-Flood, a Wikipedian of 10 years and counting who is dedicated to making Africa's voices heard and its people's knowledges and realities seen by activating content onto Wikimedia and other open access projects. With my co-partner, collaborator, and co-schemer, we create projects that activate Africa by supporting the growth and skills development of communities. Like all of us, I do not and cannot do this alone. I live at the very, very tip of Africa in a small place called Simonstown. I was born in Zimbabwe, and against the contentious politics in southern Africa at the time, it was a very personal scuffle between my parents that made sure that my brother and I were traveling relentlessly between Zimbabwe, South Africa, and the UK. For most of my life, I saw Africa from the air or from the road, trying to collate what I saw laid out far beneath me with what my on-the-ground experiences were. My ferocious reading was filled with holes, and the older I grew, the more I realized if it was difficult for me, as a child of privilege, to find stories that reflected my reality, it must be impossible for people who did not have access at all. Once I had control over my own movement and trajectory, I've concentrated on using a variety of distribution platforms that encourage Africa's voices to be heard at a global scale. First celebrating its film and broadcasting landscape, and then supporting wider access for audiences and artists to Africa's visual and performance art, music and poetry. Since 2011, I've been focusing on knowledge creation, culminating in Wiki in Africa's work, focusing on moving the dial on African visual and written knowledge via Wikimedia and other open movement platforms. So what am I going to talk about today? We've all seen this true representation of Africa. Maps matter so much. They are essential for knowing where you are in the world. Maps should represent irrefutable truths. This mountain range, this height, this length, this road, this settlement, this bus stop, this scenic bench. And as we all know, knowledge is power. Africa has been, and in some cases continues to be, misrepresented and ignored. The truth has been manipulated as a means to control and disempower, and worse, to negate, ignore, and make invisible the truths of millions, even a billion people. Unfortunately, this problem is not confined to history. When I started this journey in 2011, this is what the Wikipedia articles relating to Africa look like. Each dot or bubble on the map accounts for an edit on one day in 2011. You can see the kind of size of the problem. But it doesn't look too different from very similar representations for your community, from pretty much around the same time. Although I have to say, yours does seem a little bit healthier. By Stephen Kay, this one was from April 2012, and represents a random sample of 1% of binding points according to the first 3 characters of the geo-hash of each point. The next was compiled by Mark Graham at the Oxford Internet Institute in 2014 from the latest files available per world region on download from geofabrique.de on December the 12th, 2013. Since then, there has been an explosion of Wikimedia communities across Africa. Where do we stand today? The short answer is not much better. But then, as the true map of Africa shows us, Africa is indeed a vast, underestimated space, and it takes time to build up the critical mass required to make a significant dent in the gaps that exist. This is a representation of a Wikidata map showing an intensity level of 25 for pixels by Adshaw for Wikidata.con, created on the 2nd of November in 2021. So why is it so hard? It's not that there is not the population to potentially fill the critical gaps that exist. Those maps that relate to online content are very different from this map that shows where the populations are in both the big and the little cities. 11 urban areas that are displayed there have more than 5 million inhabitants, which equal about 95 million people. But in the smaller spaces, which cover the majority of the urban spaces in Africa, 6,740 of those urban spaces have 180 million people living inside them. And even smaller spaces are growing. So the smaller spaces between 10,000 and 100,000 inhabitants grew over 15 years, and yet still very little content that comes from Africa. Africa, we have a problem. I know that this is not news to anyone listening to me at the moment, but beyond the catastrophic and traumatic consequences of colonialism and the persistent inequalities resulting from the imbalances of power between the so-called developed countries and the developing countries, there are 4 challenges that have shaped the past, but if they cannot be overcome by collective effort, will greatly impact our future. These are access, control, representation, and participation. The majority of the world's population still does not have access to the internet. 4.1 billion people, or 53% of all people, are online. But that means that 40% of people are completely unconnected. 98% of the developed world uses the internet, But even in countries like the UK, 20% are not online. However, when it comes to the developing world, only 44% use the internet. And while virtually all urban areas in the world are covered by a mobile broadband network, many gaps still exist, especially in the rural areas. Only 29% of individuals in Africa actually use the internet. This rises to 40% if you are between the ages of 15 and 24. In rural areas, only 22% has access to 4G. And in urban areas, that does come up to 77%. But even when they do have access, they are forced to use it in a restricted way. This is due to cost. Sub-Saharan Africa ranks as the most expensive region in the world. The average price for 1 gig is $6.44 across Sub-Saharan Africa. In Oceania, it's less, and South America, it's even less. And what is ironic is that in North Africa, it is the cheapest region, with averaging just $1.53 per gigabyte. And if the data wasn't enough, the devices are even more expensive. In Africa, the devices take 63% of the average monthly income. Controlling access. Slow connectivity speeds is a sneaky form of control. And as you can see from these maps, Africa still has the slowest connectivity speed. Those are sneaky forms of ways to control access. But government restrictions, such as censorship, surveillance, or just switching it off, happen to countries in Africa with scary regularity. In 2020, Access Now and Keep It On Coalition documented at least 155 internet shutdowns in 29 countries around the world. Between January and May of 2021, Uganda, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Chad, and others, including Sudan recently, were turned off, or at least have had partial bans. The content that can be accessed can also be controlled. The information that is received by those with the fewest options is controlled by mobile platforms. Zero-rated or packaged offerings often only have content from the for-profit platforms like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. Even Wikipedia, as the definitive site for sharing encyclopedia content for free, is often filtered through a Google site, where Google mediates an enormous amount of the world's searches for local information. Where does knowledge sit? What knowledge is recorded and what is not? As you can see from this infographic, this is what the global academia looks like. That microscope shows where Sub-Saharan Africa sits. Similar arrangements will exist for memory, heritage, and cultural institutions and libraries, with so much of the world's knowledge researched and created by institutions outside of developing countries. No wonder there is little content to feed online about these alternative spaces and alternative histories. Thirdly, there's representation. Wikipedia, Wikivoyage, Flickr, and every other commons and every other platform that aggregates user-generated content is similarly characterized by concentrations of content from developed countries and only small amounts of information produced by those that are considered developing. For instance, there's more content in Wikipedia about the Netherlands than there is about all of Africa combined. Who contributes the content and what information is available to those contributors skews what people see and what people read. Just 18% of content on all Wikipedia relates to women, and that includes the biographies on Wikipedia. And only 19% of those biographies on English Wikipedia are about women. But then who contributes? If you don't have the people contributing, you don't get the content. The knowledge that is available is already skewed towards the developed countries, and thus any that is contributed about their developing economy counterparts reflects the perspectives, experiences, and worldviews of the developed country. And this then comes back to who edits Wikipedia. So 87% of contributors are male, 45% are from Europe. Europe itself only accounts for nearly 10% of the global population. 19% of editors come from North America, which accounts for nearly 5% of the global population. But fewer than 1% of Wikipedia's US editors identify as Black or African American. So the diversity, even within communities, is something to be looked at and is being looked at. Let's come back to Africa again, because that's why we're here. So Africa has a population that accounts for 17% of the global population. And despite that, only 1.5% of Wikipedians is based in Africa. Remember those access statistics? In Africa, 29% of individuals use the internet despite there being 80% mobile coverage. Only 28% of urban households have internet access, and go down to 6% for rural areas. Women's internet use lags behind men. Globally, 48% of women use the internet versus 55% of men. In Africa, the internet usage drops to 37% for men and 20% for women. The digital gender gap in Africa is widening. Beyond this being a pretty awesome photo, and you might have noticed I have a soft spot for photos, I chose this image to open this talk because it shows the iguana's complete confidence in its own ability to bridge, no, obliterate that gap. In hurtling itself across the void, it has taken the power away from the barrier and risen to the challenge on its own terms, much like this guy. Maps matter beyond the need for them during crises. What you are doing connects us to our environment, our external and internal topography. Maps situate us. They provide paths forward, aptly displaying our complex pasts, recording and displaying the present, and in doing so, providing viable options for our future. Mostly they connect us to each other. They chart a course through difficult terrain. They make visible what often seems impossible to document. The Wikiverse and Open Mappers are truly aligned. We aren't supplying information for the worst of reasons, but for the very, very best. Together, we are opening up Africa from within, by Africans, for Africans, not to be exploited, not to be dominated, but to share, celebrate, reveal, help, locate, collaborate, and connect. Look at what you have done. This is truly a thing of beauty. I only wish that we could show a similar progression with Commons, Wikimedia articles, or Wikidata points, but perhaps next year. We cannot do this immense work without each other. Embrace your colleagues in Open. Let's forge this path together. If you haven't already, reach out to your Wikimedia and Creative Commons communities, or help to build those who are only just starting, and vice versa. Work with teachers who are already working within and designing open education resources. Make open the normal way of working. Let's tell and share our multiple stories, share our voices, share our experiences, share our realities, identities, and cultures and truths together. We cannot and should not rely on the systems that created this problem to fix it. Those 4 challenges need to be done on our terms, and indeed, it is already happening. By the end of 2019, OpenStreetMap contributors, you, had collectively mapped more than 70 million ways and 600 million nodes onto the African continent. You're already seizing the day and are well on the way to creating the most complete and accurate map, especially for rural Africa. The theme of this 2021 State of the Map Africa is leaving no one behind, emerging from the global pandemic. You know what it is like for an entire continent to be left behind. You're not going to allow that to happen again, not on your watch. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing presentation that we've just watched right there by Ayla, who has highlighted not just the work that OpenStreetMap communities have done in the past, but the importance of making things open and building with communities as we proceed. And just to share some comments that have been shared while the presentation was ongoing is that Janet Chapman shared that this is so true. This is while you were sharing about the challenges that a lot of African communities face while trying to connect digitally. And she was sharing that the digital champions we work with have so many challenges getting online. And she went ahead to share a link for the Hope for Girls and Women community in Tanzania. Same for Jihad, who also shared that to get full access to internet, he used to come to a nearest small town in Cameroon, and while he was based in Chad. And that was very difficult. And just more people sharing on how internet access within the region is expensive and inaccessible. So I guess a question would be, what are some things that communities can do to sort of mitigate these challenges when it comes to internet access, accessing digital spaces and all that?
Yeah, so hi everyone. It's been lovely to see your comments on as it's been rolling through, and hi from Cape Town, from a sunny Cape Town. So to answer the questions, while I was writing this keynote, I was very much aware that I was making obvious everybody's lived experience. Everyone lives with how hectic the cost of not only data, but also devices, how awful it is to, how unstable connectivity is, how slow it is, and how even unstable the electricity is. So even in Cape Town, and which has an existing kind of supposedly stable infrastructure, I could be turned off in the middle of this talk. It's not unusual. So what we did as Wikipedians is that when we started doing outreach in Uganda, Tanzania, and Cote d'Ivoire, we found that these things came up again and again. So the not only data, and not only the fact that sometimes the connectivity was bad, but also that the training couldn't go ahead because the electricity went off, or something happened, the generator didn't work, or whatever was going on. And so we came up with Wikifundi, which is an offline. It uses Raspberry Pi, and it's a wiki-based editing environment that basically mimics Wikipedia, but it's an offline on a local server, a Raspberry Pi server. And in that way, because we've navigated around kind of like, we always make a plan. So we have to, whether you have to go to the border with Chad, or whether you have to kind of like find another way of hustling to get connectivity, there is always a way around. And I think that kind of innovation that drives Africa, because we've had to innovate, kind of is the way that we can get around these four major issues. So access definitely is something that we can navigate as far as, okay, so we can push and advocate to have cheaper and better, and have our governments actually take this seriously, because it's holding back the economies. But also it can also be something that we can use offline spaces, and we can use offline technology to not only navigate in the way that we have, but not only navigate that kind of frustration, but also to navigate things around the control elements as well. So on the Wikifundi that we have, we also have Wikipedia, and we have other open education resources that are downloaded. So for schools, they have a library that they can access. and it can be fueled by a data pack, so by a power pack. So that kind of thing can also happen.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think that sort of answers the question that Geoffrey had on things that we can learn from the Wikimedia community. I'd also share, maybe because of time, if you have additional info or longer answer to that, if you could share that on the comment section. And also, as you just wrap up this session, first of all, to thank Ayla for the amazing presentation, and also for joining in to answer just one question because of time.
No problem.
Yeah,
I'm around, so I can.
Mhm.
Please contact me if you want to chat.
Yeah, so yeah, if you have any questions for Ayla, please reach out to her. You can search for her details on Hopin, and you should be able to get that. And also, as she had shared, there's room for collaboration between ISM communities and Wikimedia communities. So feel free to check out the Wikimedia website, and also reach out to people like Geoffrey, who's also done some work with the Wikimedia community for that. So we'll wrap it at this point. Thank you so much again, Ayla.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great conference.
Okay, thank you so much.